Welcome to the Word for 2021. Today we're in Genesis chapter 8. In chapter 6, the ark was built. In chapter 7, the flood waters came as Noah and the animals were inside the ark. There was water above the sky and there was water below. The springs burst forth and the water above was released, and the earth was deluged with water for 40 days and 40 nights. Noah and the animals were lifted above in the ark 20 feet above the mountain peaks. 5 months after the rain began, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat, which is there in Turkey. During this time, it appears as though God was not speaking. He was silent. God does not speak until verse 15. But during this time, what did Noah and his family do? They floated and they waited. Month after month, Noah and his family worked day by day. They were being faithful. They remained faithful, working and waiting. During times when God seems as though he is silent, we need to continue to be faithful. Continue working, doing what God has called us to do. I love what was said by one person. When taking a test, the teacher is always silent, but their eye is always on their students. In Genesis chapter 8, verse 1, it says that God remembered Noah. Now that word remember doesn't mean that God forgot and, oh yeah, Noah. No, it actually means that he was mindful of and that he was making a change. It's important to understand how the story is laid out. Here in America, what do? We read a book, and the climax of the book is near the very end of the book. When we're watching a television show or a movie, the movie starts and it builds and it builds and it builds until finally you have the climax right at the end. In Hebrew literature, it's totally different. It's actually known as a chiasm structure. That means that the main point, the climax of the account, is actually in the very middle of the story. And so there's a lot of repeating that goes on when you read the story of Noah. It starts, and then there's another point that equals the beginning there at the end. And then a point, and it matches another point, and a point, and it repeats here. And the climax is in the middle of the story. And what is the middle of the story here in Noah? It's verse 1. And God remembered Noah and all the animals on the ark. It speaks of God's faithfulness. God's faithfulness is what this story is all about. The first thing that Noah did when he was released from the ark, there in verse 15, was he built an altar and he worshiped God. The very first verse of chapter 8 and the very last verse of chapter 8 speak of God's faithfulness. The last verse in chapter 8 speaks of the fact that as the seasons continue, day and night, God is keeping his promises. The story of Noah is that God is faithful. For you and for me, as we read chapter 8, what should we learn? That God has his eye upon us, whether we're in the midst of the storm or on either side of the storm. And every day that we're alive, we have something to be thankful for. And with each day that we are alive, it speaks of God's faithfulness. We have something to be thankful for. Every breath that we have is a gift from God. Everything that we possess is because of God's goodness. What was the first thing that Noah did when he came off of the ark? He made an altar and he worshiped God. What is the correct response that we should have because of God's goodness? It is to worship and to be thankful. Count your blessings. God is good. As you look at your life, you have much to be thankful for. So worship God today and be thankful. Thank you for joining the Word for 2021.